introduce, as Pete's obviously just clicked the button, just obviously to let you know that we are recording the session today. If anybody does have a problem with that, I'm afraid I just have to ask you to leave. To be fair, you're really only going to hear from myself and the other speakers. I don't think there'll be that much from anybody else, so nothing really to worry about. What you will also have seen on that slide is that everything that we use today in terms of the presentation, we will be making available to you. We have a Padlet that goes on to, but you also have relationship managers at AOC that you talk to, and so if you want it sent to you, that can be done as well. And as I said, questions into the chat, but doesn't have to be a question. I'd say, you know, if there's something that we say, if you'd just like to make a comment, if you'd really like to tell us how you're doing something, it is a great opportunity today to share good practice as well. So yeah, please do that. It doesn't just have to be a question. As I've already said, in terms of our housekeeping, if we can keep the microphones on mute, that would be really helpful. And as we said, questions, comments, and obviously recorded, and everything will be made available to you. So just to let you know who's on the meeting today. So obviously I've already introduced myself. We're also so thrilled that Sam has given up some time this morning to join us. So Sam is at Havant and South Downs College, and so she's going to talk to us about what's been happening there in terms of their T-level science curriculum. So it'd be really fantastic to hear that, and we're so pleased that you could join us this morning, Sam. And then after that, continuing obviously with the theme in terms of the whole curriculum, we've got Craig and also Craig's colleague Joe, who are here today from NCFE. And as the slide said, Craig is secretary manager and Joe looks specifically after the science. So they're going to run through some really important aspects in terms of the T-level science curriculum. So again, questions, get them up in that comments, because this is really your chance to ask things that you haven't had chance to ask in other forums. So it will be the four of us really inputting, but my colleagues Pete and Abby from AOC are also lurking around in the background. They're our technical support today, so you'll hear us asking Pete and Abby to swap the slides and to do polls, etc., that we've got for you. So team of us today, so hopefully that'll be really useful. In terms of what we want to cover this morning, we're booked for about 3 hours. We'll see how it actually goes. We will have a break at some point halfway because it's far too long to be looking at the screen. So what we wanted to cover, just very quickly, a T-level overview. I know most of you know it, but it's just always good to make sure that we're all talking the same language. Then obviously, as I say, Sam's going to give us an input on what they're doing in Havant and South Downs. Craig and Joe will cover lots of bits and pieces in terms of how the T-level is structured, things that you might not have quite picked up when you've looked at the specification, so they'll do that. And then what I'm going to do after we have a break is I'm going to try to link a lot of that into the industry placement. I'm going to talk about the industry placement in terms of what it is supposed to be, and this whole idea around objective setting and setting learning goals for the placement, and how that needs to link in very closely with the technical qualification specification. So that's our plan for today. I hope that is what you were thinking it is. That does mean then by the end of the session, we'd obviously like you to be really confident in terms of the industry placement purpose. Yeah, you'll have a good idea what other people have been doing in terms of the science curriculum, both planning and delivery. You'll have a lot of ideas around curriculum design, and we'll have looked very closely at the objective setting and learning goals in terms of the industry placement. So that's what we're hoping to do. So this one, and I know you've probably all seen this Venn diagram at some point, so I don't really want to dwell on it too much. The trick here, of course, is who knows which bit of this Venn diagram is now incorrect. There is one incorrect circle, square, not sure what it is. If anybody wants to tell me in the chat, I'm more than happy to see who's is observant enough to know which bit of this is now incorrect. Anybody volunteering an answer for me in the chat? Go on, I know you all know. So obviously now, as of about 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, maybe now. Yes, thank you, Sam. The English and maths requirement is now not as it was. So the Secretary of State announced a couple of weeks ago that whereas previously, in order to actually achieve your T-level, students would have had to achieve their GCSE grade 4 or their level 2 functional skills. That is no longer the case. So students who don't have those grades can still be awarded their T-level. That really just brings the T-level in line with other technical qualifications. So I've always been able to get a BTEC in applied science, even if I didn't have GCSE grade 4 in maths. However, because those technical qualifications, as is the T-level, as it's part of a study programme, there is still obviously a condition of funding that does require students to be working towards. That's a very careful bit of phrasing there, which I'm sure you're all aware of. The other thing I just say, and I'm sure we'll touch on this as we go through the rest of this morning, is that within the T-level in science, as within all T-levels, there is a requirement for English, maths and digital, and there are those general English, maths and digital competencies woven throughout the T-level. And because of both those things, really, my conversations with providers in relation to this change in the English and maths requirement, actually they're saying to me that it's not really going to make any difference in terms of their entry requirements onto the T-level. That may well be the case for you guys as well. So there is a difference there. So we do need to be aware of it. But how much a difference that's going to make in reality to what you're doing, I don't know. I do know that my conversations with providers have been very interesting around the entry requirements in terms of what they're asking for the actual GCSE science. And again, that might be something that you want to comment, you want to question as we go throughout this morning. So that's the box that now is slightly incorrect. But just obviously in terms of the other boxes, and this is more about terminology really than it is anything else, just so that you're clear as we go through this morning and we're all really speaking the same language. So in terms of T-levels, we talk about the core component, and that core component being made up of two things really. We talk about the fact that it's the knowledge, understanding, principles, concept bit, and also there's an employer set project as part of the core. That's obviously the assessment method, but that employer set project focuses on some core employability skills. So within that core, concept, knowledge, understanding, and also some core employability skills. And then obviously the occupational specialism, and as I'm sure you're all aware, in terms of T-level science, there's a possibility that students could do one of 3 occupational specialisms, and the vast majority of providers who are delivering T-level science at the moment are going with the laboratory, what sciences. Food science and metrology would be the other options. I think there are a few providers who are doing food science. Certainly Craig and Joe can tell us a bit more about that in terms of actual numbers. Then obviously the industry placement. Now, whilst NCFE as the awarding organisation doesn't have responsibility in terms of the industry placement, and whilst the industry placement is not formally assessed, the intention is that that industry placement is very closely linked to the technical qualification. And the wording from DFE, and we'll talk about it as we go through this morning, is that the T-level placement should be relevant to the occupational specialism, and that T-level placement is a chance for students to apply their skills, hone and develop their knowledge and skills, so that they're supported then in terms of when they're doing their occupational specialism. Additional mandatory requirements, just so I've done the whole set of them. We don't have anything particularly in terms of science, but that box was always there as an in case, really, and that doesn't just refer to qualifications. So for example, we could have possibly put something like first aid or something in there. It doesn't only refer to that. Those of you who might also have some responsibility or involvement in T-level health will probably be aware that a lot of students on placement are going to need to have their jabs. That, you know, that's the only way they're going to be allowed on placement. So it may be that what we have to do in the future is use that mandatory requirement box to actually say something about that, because obviously as things develop, these boxes could be added to. So that's really all I'm going to say in terms of the overview. I know for the most of you that really will just have been a recap. So thankfully, I will now shut up and hand over to somebody who knows much better than I do about what's happening in terms of T-level science delivery. So Sam, I'll hand over to you to just give us perhaps a little bit of an intro in terms of T-level science at Havant and South Downs, and then kick off as to how things are going.
Thank you very much, Sharon. So yeah, as Sharon said, I'm the head of faculty for vocational STEM courses at Havant and South Downs College. My teaching background is science, specialising in biology, and I manage at both South Downs campus and Havant campus, Alton campus, sorry. So 2 different campuses at 2 different stages in this process, actually. So I've been invited to talk about science T-levels, which is something that I've been working on for about 1.5 years now. And so leading the design, the implementation of science and health T-levels, and working on that at the college. I've also, alongside that, for my sins, decided to do a master's degree, and as part of my dissertation on the master's degree, I did my dissertation on the curriculum design of T-levels, looking at the first T-levels in construction, digital and education at the college as a case study. So quite a lot of background information that I already know about. So at HSDC, we're an early adopter of T-levels, starting with those first ones in 2020. So they're in their 2nd year now. We've started offering science and health from this September, and we, as you can see on the slide, that we're offering quite a few different specialisms, 3 different specialisms within the health section, 1 healthcare science specialism and 1 science specialism, which we've chosen laboratory science. We chose laboratory science because previously we've done apprenticeships in laboratory technician apprenticeships, so we feel we've got employers nearby that we know that laboratory science would link with more closely, which is why we've chosen that specialism particularly. So also as part of my areas, I look after engineering, so there's also I'm now looking into engineering T-level for next September as well. So I've had quite a lot of influence, I suppose, within the T levels at Havant and South Downs in the last year and this year as well. So yeah, good, next slide. I was going to do a Chris Whitty there, but we've moved on already. That's great. So placements, I thought I would start by talking about that, because I think that's the thing I'm most worried about when first coming into T levels and first planning them, thinking how will I secure enough placements for students. And so this is a process that as a college we decided to take this process, and so the T level lead at the college and myself followed this process with science and health starting at the very beginning of the academic year last year. So first we held employer boards, so met with about 5 laboratory science employers, and in that introduced what T levels were to them, because obviously they weren't familiar with that. We shared the specification with them before the meeting, and then in the meeting discussed that specification. So our first meeting was aimed at probably not talking about placements too much, and more talking about the content and how T levels are different from what they might think of with regards to other vocational courses, to try and understand their view. Do they have students? Do they take work experience students now already, or what's the reasoning why they might not take work experience students now? With the science employers, we found that many of them don't currently take any student that's not a graduate. So they were very much like, currently we only take graduates into our workplace for placements, and so they didn't really see a 16-year-old potentially having the skills that they need. So we discussed what sort of skills they would be looking for. They were particularly interested when we looked at the specification to see certain things in there, very useful but basic content, such as COSH and following an SOP, so standard operating procedure, and the fact that good laboratory practice was in there as well. So these are sorts of things that started to convince these employers that maybe these students might not be as useless as they thought they might be, if that makes sense. So there was that side of things. It was about highlighting what the T level was and how it's different, and how that they wouldn't just get a student that would be of no use to them. We also discussed at what point, so what parts of the core needed to be covered before they would be able to go out to placement. So which things, we've got a little list of sort of things that the placements want students to have done before they come out, and that's influenced when our placement actually is within our plan as well. So within this academic year, we're actually planning for placements to be nearer the end of the core content, so that we've covered quite a lot of it. So we've got at the college a business engagement team that deal with apprenticeships, but they also organise placements. They're sort of the outward looking team. So we've now passed on our contacts to that team to arrange the placements. I don't get so involved in that part now, but obviously I've been very heavily involved in the employer boards and getting the employers on board in the first place before we've even talked about having those placements, which is what the business engagement team are now doing. We ask our students to contact the placements as well. So when we're actually coming up, so in the 6 weeks leading up to the placement, about that sort of time, we ask the students to contact the placement they'd like to go to arrange, so they can demonstrate those skills of well, they can practice the skills of using a telephone to talk to people in a professional manner, but the employers can also gauge, they can see, do they like this person? They can start to build that rapport with the student a little bit earlier before they even go out. And then the placement occurs. So we haven't actually had the lab science students go out on placement yet, but we have done this process with the science and the other health T level and the healthcare science T level. They've gone out quite successfully so far. So this is a sort of process for placements that we've followed, and just to get them out into the setting, really. Next slide, please. So following on from the placements, So is the timetabling, I felt that follows on, because where do you put the placements? That's a big question when you're thinking about your timetabling. The other question with timetabling is, how do I get this list of all these things that need to be covered into a timetable, which was something that my dissertation particularly looked at. So we've got 16.5 hours per week at the college. That's a college decision regarding T-levels, and it's actually a little bit more hours than our normal level 3 vocational courses. So that's a decision that's been made for us, so we didn't get to decide on that. So we use that time, we block that time out for different things. So what we did is we looked at the list of all the different elements within the core content and grouped them together, linking with what specialist teachers we had. So we've done that with, so chemistry is being taught by a chemistry teacher, so that good scientific practice is taught by somebody who's been in industry and worked in a laboratory setting. So I'm quite lucky at South Downs that I've got the relevant specialist staff in the relevant places to be able to teach these sorts of things. So the core science we've broken up into biology and then chemistry and physics together. And then there's further science as well, and we split that into the 3 sciences. So there's a biology, a chemistry and a physics section, mostly based on the amount of content that there is in each of those sections. And then we've put things together like A1 and A2 are both about working in the science industry, so they've been put together. A3 and A4 are all around health and safety, so they've been put together. A5 and A6 are all about data. You can see what I'm doing. We're just chunking things together, and then those things can all be taught in that time each week. So every week students have a lesson for each of those different parts that we've chunked together. And as I said, that has allowed me to put the specialist teachers in the right places at the right times. With the employer set project and the core skills, we've tried to embed some of them into lessons. So if we think about one of the core skills is presentation or communication skills. So for the communication, the core skills, we're trying to do different activities that will allow students to practice communicating in different ways. For research, we set some research tasks within the lesson. So you're just trying to fit in and practice those core skills wherever possible in the lessons while covering the content as well. And then we've also done an online activity with the students. So we've set them some online learning time, and in that online learning time, we've set them some academic writing to practice doing that writing to that level, and doing a similar to a literature review, but in a smaller way, so they can practice their research skills and writing skills again, but with a bit of a scenario similar to the employer set project sort of set up, as it were. So we've given the science students that's how they're sort of preparing in the background for the employer set project, rather than having a set lesson or anything for that. We're doing it sort of interwoven, as it were. With the occupational specialism, that's very, very practical looking, and therefore we're looking to do that in the second year. So first year is focused on the core, second year the specialism, and we're going to try and make it feel more like work in the second year. So the students have a designated laboratory is the aim, and then they can come into their laboratory, have to put their lab coat on, do all the usual bits. There'll be some things they're monitoring, temperatures of fridges and whatnot. So just as if they were in a normal sort of working environment, practicing being in that way, rather than then, so that they get them to the mindset, rather than being at college, they're at a place of work, trying to get that mindset going into the second year. And work placement, we've decided to do block weeks. We decided that based on our feedback from our employers in the employer board. They thought it'd be quite difficult to have students just for a certain day a week, as that would it would hit their business the same day every week. Whereas if they had block weeks, they could identify somebody within their organisation that would be able to support a student in those particular weeks. So yes, we've put in block weeks at different points throughout the course, and that's how we're doing our placement in our timetabling. Next slide, please. So if we think about assessment, so there's the core exams and the employer set project, which we're taking in the June window, and that's obviously at the end, near the end of the first year then, and that gives students a chance in November. They can take a second. They've got that resit opportunity if needed. We're really hoping we don't need a resit opportunity, because how we're going to revise alongside occupational specialism and everything else, who knows. So at the moment we're keeping our fingers crossed, but we won't need a resit opportunity for that purpose. So we've chosen that, and that was very much a choice that I made based on my dissertation. So looking at the curriculum design, I looked at where did our other T levels put their core exams, and 2 of them did it in the June, 1 of them have gone for the November, and generally students, when I surveyed the students, they were happier with the idea of it being done in June. Those students seemed happier with their T level than the ones that were doing it in November. I think they were more worried about remembering everything in the survey. So that's another reason why we chose the June for our science account ones. So that means in the second year we can focus on our occupational specialism, we can focus on assessment of that, and we can focus on getting the students out on their placement and doing set weeks. We aren't fully set on exactly what we want to do with the second year's placement weeks. Do we want to block them together? So maybe have quite a big chunk of weeks where students are out 7 weeks, say, but they come into college 1 day each of those weeks to keep in touch. That's an option we're thinking about. The other option would be to put in 2-week blocks sort of quite regularly throughout the second year, which feels a little bit disruptive potentially to the teaching. So we're sort of weighing those things up at the moment, aren't fully decided on that. So next slide. Moving on to the resource implication. So as a college, we were really lucky to basically get the bid that we put in accepted, to get funds for both estate refurbishment and equipment. So I've just got some bits of advice around that in this slide really. So there was quite a tight turnaround between knowing exactly what the allocation of funds actually was and then the starting of purchasing. There was quite a short turnaround there. So if you're putting a bid in, it's definitely worth going through the spec and seeing what you might buy and making a bit of a wish list so that you're ready to go should you get those funds, because that's what we did, and we found that was really useful because there wasn't much time to actually think about what you need in between, getting the money and spending it had to be done quite quickly. So we created lists as in waves. So we'd said what was the most important stuff that we really, really needed to buy, essential items list, and then what was the nice to have list. And so we made 2 lists like that. So that meant not all the money was spent at once. We bought all the essential items first, and that's been really useful because we have found things that we really needed to buy that we didn't think we needed to buy. We didn't realise until we started doing the actual delivery, and that's when we've realised that we needed to purchase certain things where we didn't spend all the money straight away. We're able to do that, so that's been really useful. So useful that we had some money left. We're literally just finishing spending the money now, so we've taken the whole period of time to spend rather than doing it all at the beginning. So we've replaced old equipment. So our autoclave where the thermostat had gone, we've replaced that. We've replaced some of the things like some colorimeters and pH probes, things that we had but they were very old or outdated. That's what we've done mostly. We have purchased some new equipment like a UV spectrophotometer, which we didn't have before, which was something we really wanted to get and add to our sort of equipment list really of things we've got. So we spent money on the equipment, But the other thing we had was quite a lot of money towards updating our facilities, health and other facilities. So we've put in a ward, we've put in a community room for health, but also there were 3 laboratories that were already there that were updated as well as part of the funds, using up the funds. One bit of advice for that is if you are having laboratories updated or put in from scratch, just bear in mind if you've got a non-science specialist designing the labs, you might want to get heavily involved, as I had to. So we've had some challenges with regards to heights of the desks and having enough storage in our new laboratories, which I've had to rectify with our development. So it's just don't take anything for granted. Don't assume that anyone knows anything, because they tend to don't, is what I've established with regards to updating laboratories. So yeah, just get as involved as possible, I would suggest, on that, as I've had to do. So the last slide I've got here is about pinch points. So for me, sort of challenges that I see, and I don't really have all the answers to these things, but just thought I'd put them out there as something to consider. So the first thing was in the second year, obviously, when they're doing a lot of placement, what will the staff do when the students are on placement? I don't really have an answer for that just yet. We don't at the moment have any guidance from the college regarding any, like whether staff need to go out to placement to visit students or anything like that. That would be good from my perspective. That would be something that I would potentially consider, because obviously it would allow my staff to do some professional updating at the same time. But I'm not sure how employers would view that or not. I think it'll depend on each employer individually on that one. What I'm finding at the moment, so Alton, I'm looking to try and put the lab science in for next September. It's basically, I'm at a standing start again there. So it's because it's quite a way away from the campus, South Downs campus. It's good 25 miles. So I have to start again there. I'm having to meet with employers in that area and start from the beginning again. And I don't have necessarily the right specialisms and the right rooms, so I'm having to negotiate with others at that campus, because I don't currently have any science at that campus. There's no vocational science there, so I'm having to find rooms, get access to staff and rooms for my T level. So that might be a position you're actually in, but I'm now in that position for Alton. So for me, a pinch point is having those right specialist staff and rooms, is obviously a thing. Recruitment. So with this, I'm thinking recruitment of students. We've got quite a small group of students this year doing our laboratory science, and I think I'm struggling with recruitment a little bit for the lab science T level, definitely not for the nursing. That seems to sell itself. But for the science T level, I think struggling to get 16-year-olds enthused into being in a laboratory setting. And some of them don't do much practical at school, and then so they don't get that taster necessarily. So it's quite difficult. And also I think it's difficult to try and be clear why they should choose lab science rather than just doing science A levels. I think there's still a little bit of crossover there that is a difficulty for students choosing courses. So I have reworded my adverts, my stuff in the prospectus. I have made a video that's going to go out to local science teachers to try and help science teachers understand what it is a bit more, to try, because they tend to be the ones that guide students. So yeah, recruitment's going to be a bit of a process, I think, a gradual, hopefully I'm gradually going to increase my numbers as we go throughout the next few years. That's the aim anyway. But yeah, so it is more difficult, I think, to promote science T level than it is health at the moment. Also, science T level, just why there isn't any other options, I suppose, within the science T level other than the 3, is just a general question thing that I have, because I have vocational courses at the moment in forensic science, for example, and it's not clearly included in the current plans. Particularly, I'm surprised there isn't an environmental officer, given all of the current work on climate change and things like that. So I think that's something, it's not really something I can deal with, but it's just a thought that I have. And the last thing is progression opportunities. So this is twofold. So there are some universities that are still not sure whether they're accepting T-level students or not. So that's a potential progression concern for the students I have moving on. But I think also the jump from level 2 to T-level is much bigger than with the current vocational qualifications. So I think there's still work that we need to be doing there as well. So that's another challenge thing to work on, etc. So that's all I had to say. That's my update from Havant and South Downs College. If anyone's got any particular questions, please let me know. I can see in the chat.
Fantastic, Sam. Thanks ever so much. That was a fantastic insight in terms of level of detail, but also thank you for being so honest with us in terms of, you know, where things might have been difficult or could be difficult. There's a couple of questions, comments in the chat, but also I've got a few questions for you, Sam. You knew I would have, but I might have some answers to some of your questions as well, if that's a fair trade-off.
Sounds fair to me.
So I think we've got a question. I think it's around industry placement in terms of the settings or the placements that you've chosen. I think Gary's asking about, you know, what would be the minimum standard for an industry placement lab setting. But I suppose that's where you went back to your employer board thing, was it? And checked what was on the spec against what an employer could possibly offer you.
Yeah, so we just looked at any employers in the local area that had a laboratory. Really, that was the basics of it.
Yeah.
We already had some links with some of our local employers through doing the apprenticeships anyway, so we sort of used those more than too many newer ones, I suppose. So we're quite fortunate in the south, where South Downs is, that we've got we've got a water facility, obviously for testing water, so that's one type of laboratory. Then we've got research laboratories as well, with Poole and with Wickham Labs and things.
Yeah.
So we've got a range of different laboratory settings. We've also talked to the University of Portsmouth, and they're happy to have students in their laboratories, so like an educational laboratory sort of setting as well.
Yeah, and as long as, isn't it really, that wherever those placements are, you can see that students can then hone and develop their skills that are in the occupational specialism, then we're fine, aren't we, really? So I think that's all we have to look at. Have you had any success with any of the NHS path labs or anything like that, Sam, in terms of placements?
We've got a possible lab lined up, but it's not a definite at the moment. So we've had more success with the other laboratories rather than the NHS ones specifically. Yeah.
Okay. Simon's asked a question about who would you get to do the midpoint assessments. I'm not sure, Sam, whether you're meaning students or whether you're meaning who's going to be invigilating it, I suppose. I mean, I've got a bit of a linked thing to that, Sam, in that obviously I know you've done a lot of evidence-based research in terms of going for the early, as I call it, first sitting, yeah, and clearly you've got that employability skill, the skills, the core skills there interwoven already in your delivery, which I think is fantastic. So you're pretty confident then that students will be ready for that May-June series of exams then?
Yeah, we're pretty confident that there'll be, we've done some practice exams already this term.
Yeah.
And then we're going to do some more practice exams next term. So we're doing, each term we're doing a review, I suppose, of what we've covered so far, in an attempt to get them used to doing exams. I think the students themselves are quite concerned about doing exams. As you can imagine, they haven't actually done any ever. So that's a new hurdle that I don't think we'll normally have in a normal year. I don't think that will be as the same. But obviously we're having to put in. So we've put in a revision Google Classroom, which we've signposted students to, so that they get ideas on how to revise, what to do to revise, and what to revise. So we're doing lots of practice, and we've built in quite a lot of practice throughout.
Yeah. I've been talking to quite a few providers, Sam, about looking obviously at the 3 assessment objectives in terms of the AO1 is demonstrate, AO2 is apply, and AO3 is analyse and evaluate, and really getting students to understand those as well, because I think that's half the battle, isn't it, in terms of them actually accessing the questions.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of practice questions in class, and we're using A-level and GCSE for the sciences, for example. We're doing a mixture, and so what you can do is with some of the A-level questions, they practice some of those higher level skills naturally, because they're part of their questions, or some of the questions build up to do that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a case, I think, of trawling through past paper questions and finding something that will help the students.
Yeah, and then I'd say look quite widely, isn't there? Because there is a lot of other quals about that you might be able to pinch questions from, really.
Yeah. I mean, for health and safety, the OCRC Tech has a health and safety exam unit on. So you've got that's a whole load of health and safety questions at the appropriate level, actually with a health slant as well in most cases. So they've been quite useful. And then the general sciences, biology, chemistry, and physics. We've literally looked at GCSE and A level.
There's a WJC medical science one and an environmental science one as well, Sam, that you might be able to nick some questions from as well, which is answered, I think, one of the questions that we've just had posted in the chat as well. So that's great. We've had a little question, Sam, about asking you perhaps a little bit more about your block placements and how you might think that's going to fit in.
Yeah, so what we're doing with the lab science students, they're doing the core first. Literally, they'll do their exam in June, and then out they go on their placement is literally straight after. They're going for a block of 2 or 3 weeks at the very end of this first academic year. So that's to get them in. And then next year, we're either going to do a big block of 6 or 7 weeks where they're out on placement, but they come into college 1 day a week in each week, just to keep in touch and cover some little bits of content, so that we don't feel like they're not at college at all. Or instead of doing that, we might do, in college for a little bit, 2 weeks block, little bit more in college, 2-week block, little bit more in college, 2-week block. We're just not sure which model we're going to go with yet. We're lucky, and obviously we've got education and construction and digital already doing their second year right now. And one of them has taken the approach of doing the full 7 weeks. So we're basically looking to see how that goes with that T level, and going to get some student views from that and decide whether that's the best route or not.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. So I've just got one more question, and then we'll have to move on, but hopefully you can stay for the rest of this morning, can you, Sam, as well, just in case?
Yes.
Brilliant, fantastic. So we've just got a question about your entry requirements for the T level in science, both in terms of English and maths, but maybe also in terms of GCSE science as well.
Yeah, so our entry requirements are grade 5s, GCSE, English, maths, and double science. So if someone has a single science, we wouldn't put them on the T level. They have to have the minimum of a double science. Majority of our science T level students actually have triple science. So.
Okay, brilliant. And I'm just going to answer one of your questions, Sam, in terms of the occupational specialisms and your query around the environmental officer one. So because of the way that the T levels have been developed to align obviously with the apprenticeship frameworks, because we had to start with the apprenticeships in order then to develop the outline content, because actually there wasn't an apprenticeship that we could use. That's why we haven't been able to take that forward yet as an occupational specialism. But because the whole idea is that we will always have that alignment, if there is an apprenticeship standard that comes on board, then you could see that occupational specialism coming on board in terms of the T-levels in years' time. Yeah, does that help? So
sounds good.
Yeah, don't ever say never, because there could be. Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Sam. That really was fantastic. Guys, do still post in the chat, because we will keep stopping, and it may be that questions are relevant to Sam, or they may be relevant to Craig and Joe. So I am going to hand over to Craig now, and he'll give you a bit of an overview, and then Joe will talk a little bit more detail in terms of science. Over to you, Craig.
Thanks, Sharon, and thank you, Sam. To be honest, Sam, you could have just done the first half of my presentation, so I'm actually going to skip over quite a few slides, so we should be able to gain a little bit of time back, because your details there, Sam, was absolutely mind-blowing. It's fantastic to hear the strong position that you guys are at your institute, so really well done from that one. But yeah, so myself and Joe, we're from NCFE. We're the awarding organisation who's got the T-level contract for multiple T-levels, but obviously today we're here to talk about health and science. As the awarding organisation for the T-level, we don't own the T-level. The T-level ownership remains with the institute. We have the contract for the development of the content and the associated assessments. All of the other elements that make up that T-level package, those 5 different boxes that we saw earlier, actually different parts of those sit with different contractual people. So at NCFE, we're there to support you on the content, so i.e. the specification and the assessment. And today's presentation by myself and Joe, we're going to talk about the overview of T-levels, but I'm going to skip quite a lot of that because I think we've covered quite a lot of that already this morning. And then I'm going to hand over to Joe, who's really going to take you through the intricacies and the granular level of actually what is that science T-level. So we'll skip through quite a lot of my slides to get to Joe as quick as we possibly can. But just very quickly, so the T-level is a 2-year program, okay? It's not a 1+1 model. Although most models you'll do core in the first year and an occupational specialism in the second year, you are enrolling your students onto that 2-year course. So you just need to be mindful of that for your retention and your achievement data. T-levels currently are only for 16 to 19-year-olds, but there are discussions or early discussions that they will eventually be rolled out for adults, but we are talking 16 to 19-year-olds for T-levels at this moment in time. As heavily discovered today already, they are the equivalent of 3 A-levels, and we'll look at the grading and the mapping against UCAS points a little bit later on. Key point from this slide, though, is the design and the creation of the T-level. It wasn't NCFE that actually created its content. It was created by the outline content of the apprenticeship standards, which Sharon was speaking about earlier, but also led by employer panels. T-level content is heavily influenced by what employers and university want. So where that level of science is really significantly increased compared to what we've seen on traditional vocational qualification at this sort of size and standard, it's because the employer feedback that we received actually, as time moves forward and technology changes and the sector changes and everything else as the world's developing, that increasing knowledge and expectation at level 3 has increased. And that's why we've seen that advancement in these level 3 qualifications. And we can move on to the next slide, please. We did have a little exercise here just to do a bit of reflection about what do you understand about T-levels at the moment. So I'm just going to pause for about 10 seconds just for you guys to read those questions. All of the answers will then come through mine and Joe's presentation today. But these are some of the most common questions that we get asked by employers, providers, parents, IAG sort of activity. So these are the sort of answers that you should be able to roll off the top of your tongue. And certainly by the end of today's presentation, you'll be able to do that. And we are sharing these slides with you as well. So you'll be able to revert back to these questions at a later date. You've seen a variation of this diagram already this morning. This is the overarching T-level structure. Doesn't matter if it's construction, education and childcare, digital, doesn't matter if it's an NCFE T-level or a BTEC or City and Guilds T-level. We all follow the same design of that T-level program, and it's made up of those 5 elements that Sharon spoke about earlier. This one is the most up-to-date one that's been shared by the Institute, so you'll see that the English and Maths one has been updated to say that students are expected to achieve their English and Maths, so it's now not that requisite where they must have it, it's their exit qualification, which we'll talk about when we come to the certification in that moment in time. The other requirements box, so that purple box for the health and science T-level, at this moment in time, we don't have any additional requirements embedded into the qualification. So they aren't expected to go out and do a health and safety or hygiene or first aid certificate. But as Sharon said, watch this space, because as time progresses, there could be other additional requirements. But at this moment in time, for health and science, you can effectively forget that purple box. So at this moment in time, for September 2021, these are the occupational specialisms and the 3 pathways that make up the health and science T-level. The key message from my part of the presentation today is, what T-level are you actually offering? Okay, and the message is, you are not offering the T-level in laboratory sciences. Okay, that is the one message that you can't get over to your students or through your IAG or your to your parents or anything like that. Okay, you are offering the T-level in health and science, focusing on the science pathway, and then they are doing one of those 3 occupational specialisms. So it's really important for your IAG, through the marketing and campaign, so it aligns to everything that NCFE is saying and that the Institute is saying and the T-level rollout is saying, that your students are on that science pathway of the T-level, and then they are focusing on one of those 3 occupational specialisms. It's up to you on your delivery model, but most people do that pathway core knowledge in the first year, so either healthcare science or science, and then in that second year they deliver one of the 3 occupational specialisms available in that science. Early data for us on recruitment numbers, we're seeing lab science is the most popular, followed by food, and then metrology, quite a small uptake at this moment in time. But they were, they're not numbers that we weren't surprised about. They are currently the only science T-level occupational specialisms available, and in total transparency, there aren't any currently else in development. What you'll see in healthcare science and health, there are some graded out ones. That's because they're either still in development or currently paused through their development stage. But what you'll see in science is what there is for this moment in time. We're not expecting to see any new ones, certainly in the next 12 to 24 months.
Craig, I know that you're trying to get us rushed through, but we just had a little comment just to say, could you talk a little bit slower? I know it's a northeast thing, Craig. I do it too, so.
Yeah, not a problem. But if we can move on to the next slide, please. So Joe's going to go into a lot more detail this morning about the different assessments, but regardless of what T-level you are actually on, all of the assessment process is effectively exactly the same. So in that first year, regardless whether it's digital construction, education or childcare or the science, you will do 2 core exams and an employer set project. And this is aligned to the A-level sort of standard of education and assessment. And that's why it's going to be graded on that A star to E grading matrix. So at the end of the first year, if that's the assessment window you decide to use, your students will effectively go into the sports hall and do 2 core exams based on that core knowledge. And they will also do a large piece of coursework effectively, which is known as an employer set project. And all 3 of those assessments will be aggregated together to give the students an A star to E grading. Joe will talk about the reset opportunities and the reset windows available in his part of the presentation. As you move into the second year, or the occupational specialism part, this is where the vocational part of the qualification effectively comes to life. And this is why it was really important for us that we followed the vocational pattern in relation to the assessment methods. And this is why there's a series of synoptic assessments, practical assessments, professional discussions, and like reflective portfolios. But because this is the vocational part of the qualification, we've decided to follow the past merit distinction grading to obviously keep it aligned with what is traditionally seen in the BTECs, the diplomas, the extended diplomas. And again, in the second year, all of those different assessment methods will be aggregated together to give that student that overarching past merit distinction grade for that occupational specialism. So they'll be graded A star to E in the first year, past merit distinction in the second year, and then they will get an overarching aggregated score for their T-level, which we'll look at over the next couple of slides. So that T-level journey across the 2 years, as I previously stated, is fully aligned to the A-level journey. So the T-level, based on all of their assessments across the 2 years, the students will be graded on a pass, merit, distinction star overall grade. And that is the equivalent to AAA in the A-level world. So as you'll see, top-end T-level student will be graded distinction star, equivalent to AAA star in the A-level world. So therefore, they'll be awarded the full amount of UCAS points, 168, and then it obviously falls below the different parameters sitting beneath that. All T-level students, as long as they successfully complete all elements of the T-level programme, will be awarded UCAS. So that isn't just for the science, construction, digital health, healthcare side. All T-levels are awarded associated UCAS points depending on that overall grade that the T-level student did achieve. So what will the T-level student actually get at the end of their qualification? Well, they will be awarded the T-level certificate awarded by the Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education. Because as I said at the beginning, they own that T-level model. It's not NCFE or BTEC or City and Guild. So as you'll see there, our logo doesn't appear on the certificate at all. It will come from the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. This is the templated one from the construction sector, because obviously they went live a year before us, but we're expecting our certificate from the Institute to look identical for this for the science sector. And what you'll see here is this particular student has been awarded that merit grade overall for their T-level, and that sits prominent above their name at the top of the certificate. And then below that, it breaks down all of the different components that that T-level student has achieved across their 2-year journey. So it informs us what their aggregated score was for their core. So that was their 2 exams in their employer set project. And then it gives us their aggregated score for their occupational specialism, or that 2nd year half of the course as well. So this student got the B and the merit, which then gave them the overall merit. We do have a table later on in today's presentation to show you what you get in the 1st year plus what you get in the 2nd year. How does that actually work out your overall grade? In addition as well, because the construction has those other requirement elements of their T-level, that 5th purple box that we looked at earlier, that's also reflected on their certificate. But because health and science doesn't have any additional requirements embedded into the T-level at this moment in time, obviously that will not be on your certificates for your particular learners. So this is based on a learner who has successfully achieved all elements of their T-level journey, including their industry work placement, because that is effectively a pass or fail element as well. Although they're not as directly assessed on their industry work placement, they must complete the minimum 315 hours as well to complete that full T-level qualification. If they were unsuccessful in an element of the T-levels, what they'll see is this next certificate, which will be known as a statement of achievement. And that will be prominently titled at the top of the qualification. So same issued by the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, overarching same kind of format, but now it is a statement of achievement, and it is a reflection of what the student has successfully passed on their T-level journey. And as you'll see, the most prominent thing removed from this one is that main grade underneath the student's name. So under Anne now, there is no recognition of that overarching merit grade. Because Anne never completed all elements of her T-level journey, it's therefore been removed that she has completed the entire T-level package, and therefore she is also not entitled to UCAS points because she hasn't completed the full T-level. But what it does illustrate is the components that Anne did complete. So she completed her 1st year core. For whatever reason, she never completed her 2nd year or the occupational specialism, whether she was unsuccessful in her assessment and therefore failed the qualification, or for whatever reason didn't progress onto the occupational specialism, but because they weren't achieved, they're therefore not reflected on her statement of achievement. So I'm just going to very briefly talk about the industry placement, because I know we've got a larger element about this later on with Sharon, but the industry work placement for health and science is a mandatory part of the qualification. So students have to go out and complete those 315 hours, or you may hear about it in days. Sometimes it's mentioned as 45 days, but the Institute like us to talk in hours. It's provider led, and Sam's given us some great analysis and stories today about the progress and direction of travel she's took with her industry placements there. And I won't steal Sharon's thunder, but that has been a huge adaptation this year, around the 25% off the job allowance in relation to the industry placement. I know Sharon will go into a lot more detail about that later on, so we'll just skip over that one briefly. But a key point message from us is it can be outside the academic timetable, because remember, you are enrolling your students on a 2-year course. So you do have that flexibility of that summer term to actually utilize placement hours as well. So what I'd like to do now, Joe is going to take you through the curriculum delivery, and he's really going to absolutely break it down, talk about all of the different components that make up the core, the occupational specialism. He's going to take you through the employer set project, the core assessment, and all of the other key elements that really are sitting within that specification. So I'm going to hand you over to our subject specialist now, Joe.
Cheers, thank you, Craig. I'm also guilty of talking quite fast, so please do let me know if I start speeding off too fast, so I will slow down. Like Craig, I did have these questions to consider about guided learning hours and what might delivery look like, what might a week of delivery look like, what resources are available, but we're just going to skip over these and go straight into it. Just like with Craig, actually quite a lot of this was actually covered by that amazing amount of detail that Sam gave us. So I'll be able to skip over a couple of bits as well. So that makes my life easier. Thank you, Sam. And then in terms of where we're starting, just in terms of the guided learning hours and total qualification time. So the definition of guided learning hours being students participating in that educational training under the immediate guidance of a lecturer or supervisor. And that includes assessments because that's under the immediate guidance, supervision of a lecturer or invigilator and so on. And then we factor that in to the total qualification time. So the total qualification time includes those guided learning hours, but then also the estimated number of hours a student will likely spend in preparation, study, or any form of participation in educational training. And you can see in that table at the top, it's split up for the core component and then the different occupational specialisms. So I won't go through each and every one, but just as an example, the core component, the guided learning hours for delivery is around 495 hours. Combine that with the guided learning hours for assessment, that makes a total of 518. And then with those other considerations within the total qualification time, that brings it up to 570. And then you can also find that breakdown for each of the occupational specialisms. So you then combine it with the occupational specialism that the student is undertaking. And that also, on top of that, is also those hours for the industry placement that Craig was just talking about. If I could have the next slide, please. And here we have that year 1 and year 2 overview. A big caveat on these things that I'm going to be talking about is these are just suggested. Obviously, as Sam's alluded to, this might be different for every provider, okay, because it's going to be what works best for your timetable. It's going to be factoring in the industry placement, and it's most importantly, it's what works best for your students. So we've seen this year a lot of providers doing initial assessments and inductions. It was mentioned, obviously with teacher assessed grades and, not having those exams for a couple of years, those initial assessments have been invaluable just to assess where those students are with their science knowledge. Then that registration period as well, as we know within providers, there can be a lot of chop and change between courses within those first couple of months. But having that core content delivery within that first year, so core component A and B and the employer set project as well. And then having the industry placement run alongside, again, that's suggested. Like Sam said, you might be having some blocked out weeks outside the academic timetable. It's completely up to you in terms of what works best for your timetabling. And then in terms of the May-June, we've alluded to, we've got that exam window for the employer set project and exams, the results in August. And then there are those reset opportunities in November and December, and again in May and June. I will be breaking down the employer set project and exams in a bit more detail. And then moving on to the second year, obviously we have that occupational specialism delivery. If you have some time after exams, you may dive straight into that occupational specialism delivery. And again, that second year to round off any of those 315 hours that you've not quite managed to get signed off. And then we have that synoptic assignment window in the second year as well. Again, I'll be breaking down those assignments in a bit more detail. If we could have the next slide, please. And again, here I've just come up with a potential week 1 delivery. And again, that huge caveat, this is not what we're suggesting to do. This is just an example of what you could potentially do and deliver in that first week. And these are actually based on our schemes of work as well. So as part of our free resources, we do have some schemes of work available to you. Again, just suggested schemes of work. You don't have to keep to them, but they are there. And they're planned for 3-hour sessions. So each of these sessions, so A1.1 there, the reason I've been so specific with that specification point is that is a 3-hour session that we have as part of our free resources on QualHub. So just using Monday as an example there, in the morning, you could cover the purpose of organizational policies and procedure in the health and science sector. That's a 3-hour session. Then using the scheme of work for an example of B content, you could cover the 3 principles of cell theory and different cells that make up living organisms. And again, For Tuesday, 3-hour session in the morning, 3-hour session in the afternoon. The Wednesday morning, I put in a session there around the employer set project. Again, this is just a suggestion. Sam said how she's actually building the employer set project tasks and core skills into sessions. You know, that's fantastic, absolutely fine. It's whatever works best in terms of your delivery and your students. And then we know typically on a Wednesday afternoon, you have some tutorial, pastoral, some enrichment time. And then again, as an example, on the Thursday and Friday, you might have students out on an industry work placement for the day. The other day could be a study day. That could be negotiated with the employers. Some students could be out on the Thursday, some could be out on the Friday, vice versa, and that swaps around. But again, it might be that you have those blocked weeks. This is just all suggestion, and it's going to be dependent on your timetabling. Next slide, please. So in terms of our resources then that we have in terms of coming up with these methods of delivery. So on QualHub, we've got various support resources for providers to help with the delivery of the T-level. So first of all, the specification. We also have a command verbs document. So for the assessments, we now have a document listing all the command verbs and what we mean by those command verbs in assessment. So explain, describe, so on and so forth. We have all our specimen assessments. So for the core components, the employer set projects and occupational specialism. We also have exemplification materials for the occupational specialism assessments. What I mean by that is we've got each assessment and we've got what does a pass look like and what does a distinction look like. Now that's actually quite useful because some of the occupational specialism assessments are very similar to the employer set project assessment. So there's a literature review, for example, in both. So you can take the exemplification material for a distinction within the literature review for the occupational specialism, and you can apply that to the employer set project as well. Also included are those teaching materials, so the core component schemes of work. We've got the free resources containing the exemplar 3-hour sessions, and we are developing some additional resources as well. So there will be some paid resources packs as well, so you can pay to have some resources packs, and they're 1-hour modular sessions as well. So they can be a bit more handpicked about which modular sessions you wish to use. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of one of our schemes of work. So for A1, I've chosen, again, these are on QualHub, these are free for you to use. Again, just suggested you don't have to use these. They might be a good basis to start with. It details the element you're working with, the different specification points about the element, the guided learning hours, and the number of sessions. And if I could just have the next slide, please. And what the schemes of work go on and do is they split them up into those 3-hour sessions. It's got the learning outcomes detailed in line with the specification. It's then got some examples of learning activities you could be doing within the classroom, the resources you'll need, and then importantly, how you could go about the assessment of those learning outcomes. Again, and you'll hear this a lot, that huge caveat, these are just suggested activities and assessment ideas. You don't have to use them. It might be, like I say, a good starting point for you to go on and plan, but they're there if you need them. If I could have the next slide, please. And then I thought it'd be good to cover an example free resource as well. So the free 3-hour sessions are on QualHub as well. You can access them through your Moodle systems as well. And it comes with an e-learning presentation as shown. So it comes up with the e-learning presentation that you can click through. And if we have a look at an example slide on the next slide, please. So you can look at general equipment in this case. So this is just one of the examples of the information slide. So even though it's an information slide, it's interactive. It's an e-learning presentation, okay, to allow you to interact and have that dialogue with your students. Also included in these free resources, so there's all that information within the sessions themselves, and then there are activities as well. So if we have a look on the next slide, there will be an activity sheet, but there's also a session plan that I'll come to first. So detailed with that session with the e-learning presentation is the session plan. So it gives you a bit more detail about the learning objectives of that session, the general aim of that session, and then if we click on to the next one, it comes up with the actual detail of each activity in each slide. So it gives you detail about how long that's going to take, It details what's going to be covered on that slide if it's an activity, but also if it's an information slide, it gives you a bit more detail about the information covered. Also, any resources that would be needed. It does also link it to those general competencies that I'm going to come around and talk about a bit more later. Again, some ideas about how you might assess that activity, and it also links it to the learning objectives within that session. So that starter activity links to the first learning outcome of that session. And then an example of an activity sheet. And these are all embedded within the session, so you can click on. Students can download these, have their own copy, have a go at the activity, fill it all out. And then also they come with home learning study as well, home learning study sessions, which if we just click on to the next animation, it'll appear. So you can, again, these are all optional. You can send students home with these home study sheets, assessing that knowledge from the session, and some even prepare for the next session as well, just to make sure they're ready to progress. And if we could go on to the next slide, please. Again, some more of these questions, but I'm just going to skip over these and go straight into it in terms of what are the opportunities for practical work, and are there any practical requirements? It's quite often a question we get. So throughout the T-level, there are various opportunities to embed practical skills. So for example, even within the A component, there's an opportunity to do aseptic techniques and using a microscope. This is not a comprehensive list, by the way. These are just some hand-picked examples. So some other examples from the B content: using differential staining, investigating the physical and chemical properties of metal, acid and bases, investigating the resistance in a circuit, the effect of catalysts on the rate of reaction. Just again, not comprehensive, just some hand-picked examples. In the laboratory science occupational specialism, though, there is a list of required practical activities. So as you're coming on to second year delivery, and if you're delivering the laboratory science occupational specialism, it will be useful to look ahead to that list of practicals to make sure they're covered. Also, in terms of what Sam was saying, in terms of ordering equipment and things like that, making sure you've got the equipment to support those required practical activities. Also importantly as well, there's knowledge from core component A that could be applied throughout the practical work that you're doing with students. So for example, using the health and safety executives 5 steps to risk assessment. Every time you're coming up to do a practical, the students could have a go at those 5 steps, create their own risk assessments. They could be referring to the methods within practicals as standard operating procedures, just little occupational things to bring into that delivery. You could be getting them to consider the storage, transport and disposal of waste of any chemicals they're using in line with those regulations within A3 and A4. And then some other delivery ideas as well, because obviously I've talked a lot about suggested delivery ideas and using those schemes of work. That's not, one size doesn't fit all. Okay, there's lots of great examples going on in relation to the delivery of T-levels. And I can see some familiar faces, and I think I'm stealing a couple of ideas from a couple of you, so I apologise now. And although the reference schemes of works suggest a linear delivery of content, lots of providers, and Sam alluded to this as well, bringing together different components, okay, so not just doing it A1, A2, A3, A4, actually bringing together different components to help that better, actually more of a linear delivery based on linking those components together. And then some providers are delivering the root content in mixed classes within health, healthcare science and science. So having all those students mixed together, and I'll just discuss what that root content is on the next slide. So what we mean by root content, and this is what Craig was on about in terms of, we have the 3 pathways within the T-level in health and science, but the root content, so same across all of those 3 pathways, is working within the health and science sector, that health, safety and environmental regulations in the health and science sector, managing information and data within the health and science sector, good scientific and clinical practice, and then core science concepts. And just to keep us on our toes, the numbers do differ slightly in terms of the topic numbers between those 3 pathways, but the names remain the same. The names and the content remain the same across those 3 pathways. And if we could just have the next slide, please. So some other delivery ideas, okay? So these are some of the ideas I'm stealing. So one provider is teaching the entirety of core component A contextually through the production of their own science analytical company. So everything they cover is in the context of this fictional company. And this is where I start getting a bit excited, because I thought this was a brilliant idea. And it means that students so an example of how this was delivered, students could be told that there was an inspection, okay, as there was a reported breach to health and safety regulations. This meant that students had to create and review their policies that met all the policies and regulations covered within A3. They then had to review their application of those policies for their company within reference to A4. And that contextualization really helps students engage with the T level, but also ensures that learning is delivered in an occupationally relevant way. I'm not saying you have to do this. This was just a delivery idea that I came across and I thought was, really engaging for students for the T level in science. And that's the next slide, please. Again, we'll skip these questions and we'll just go straight into it. So I'm now going to dig more into the assessments. So we've got the 7 core skills. So the 7 core skills, I'm sure you've come across these, will be project management, researching, working with others, creativity and innovation, problem solving, communication, and reflective evaluation. The employer set project requires students to apply and contextualize core knowledge through the demonstration of these core skills. And I'm going to dig more into what the employer set project is a bit later on. But again, as Sam said, these can be practiced and formatively assessed throughout the course. Okay, so bringing in those employer set project tasks within sessions. Next slide, please. And then just to make you aware again of the general competencies. So we've got general English competencies, maths and digital. I'm definitely not going to be reading through all of those, but they can be found within the specification. And they're all around ensuring those students reach that threshold competence for their chosen occupational specialism. And like I say, they're embedded within the core skills and throughout the specification. And they are assessed through the component assessments, and throughout all assessments, they will be applying these general competencies. And next slide, please. So just digging into the assessments a bit more. So we've got paper A and paper B. Craig's already mentioned they're graded A star to E and ungraded. So paper A covers section A of the core content. The paper itself is split up into sections, so quite handy for students. They'll know which section contains which learning. So section A is working within the science sector, section B, ethics, data and managing personal information. I won't go through each because you can see them detailed there. The 2 papers contain multiple choice, short answer and extended writing. And then paper B, you can see there, it's split up into biology, chemistry and physics. And then section D is a mixture of all the different scientific concepts in that final section. In terms of the retakes, there is unlimited retakes, but they must be completed within 2 years of their completion of the T level. And the retakes must include both papers. So if a student fails paper B and wants to retake this part of the assessment, they have to take paper A and paper B again. So if in that original summer window and they want to redo it in November, December, they have to do paper A and paper B together in series. And then if we could have the next slide. And then we have the employer set project assessments. So despite being set in the context of the occupational specialisms, the employer set project assesses the core knowledge covered in year 1 through the application of those core skills covered earlier. Good news, they are all externally set and externally marked. Okay, so there's no internal marking that goes on with these employer set project assessments. They're taken at your centre under supervised conditions. Again, there's unlimited retakes, but must be completed within 2 years after completion of the T level. And for the T level in science, there are 6 tasks in total, which are detailed on the next slide. So you can see there, again, I won't read through each of these, but you can see the time allocated to each. There's a research task, there's a planning task, there's an analysing data task, outcomes and conclusions where they produce a presentation and then make that presentation to the tutor. There's a group discussion and there's a reflective evaluation as well. So you can see how those tasks can be brought into the classroom when you're delivering content throughout that first year. And then if we go on to the next slide, please. And then for the occupational specialism, the synoptic assignments. So you can see how these are broken down. And again, you can see some of the similarities where you might be able to use some of those exemplification materials in your delivery of the employer set project. So the laboratory sciences has 3 separate assignments. Food sciences has 4. That's the only one that's different to laboratory sciences and metrology. And you can also see the time allowed there as well. And you can see them detailed as well. So next slide, please. And this was the table that Craig was alluding to. So in terms of the grading, so the core component is worth 40% of that final grade. The occupational specialism is worth 60%. And you can see the table how we come to that final grade based on the grade they get in the occupational specialism and in the core component. So the example with the animation that will pop up next is it will talk about merit and a C. And if the student got a merit in their occupational specialism grade, a C in their core component, that comes out as a merit overall, and they get those UCAS points as well. So if we click on the next slide, please. And then just attached on here are some useful links and resources that are referred to. So the QualiHub page for science, where you find the specification, the command verbs, the teaching resources that I was referring to can all be found on our QualiHub page. We also have a provider support page that is linked there that you can go and have a look at. There's also all the webinars we've done to date. So we've done various ones. I know a lot of you will have met David. David's done a lot of different webinars on delivery of biology, physics, chemistry within the T-level in partnership with STEM Learning. There's the professional knowledge webinars, there's the onboarding webinars. So lots of webinars there to support with your delivery. There is also below that the event booking page for the webinars that are up and coming. So we run them throughout the year. So you can book onto them, and if there's a specific part of the course you'd like support with. There's also the HODA textbook that's coming out in 2022. So I've linked there the link to the HODA textbook page. You can pre-order a free inspection copy. So as a sort of try before you buy, you can use that link and order that inspection copy. And then a link to STEM Learning as well. So STEM Learning have created a T-level landing page with lots of resources for the science T-level, including the core content and general maths competencies. And then just on the final slide, all the different contacts. So if you're someone who's thinking of joining us or have joined us already or started your T-level journey, you'll know that you'll get a dedicated account executive. So if you're wanting to start your T-level journey, you'll be assigned an account executive based on where you are in the country. They're brilliant. They'll be there. If you have any queries, they're always there to answer them or to hand you over to someone who'll better placed to help you with that specific query. Mine and Craig's contact details are there as well. And then, like I say, you've probably come across David before, who's the provider development officer for the health and science T-levels, and the general email is featured there as well. And thank you. And I think that's time for me and Craig to take any questions that have come up.
Fantastic, Joe. Thank you ever so much. And Craig, great again in terms of level of detail for everybody there. I think, you know, seeing some of those resources now, just great, Joe, really. And up to people now to explore those, really, isn't it? And see how they best want to use them. But I mean, I think the fact that you've got all those is just fantastic. We've got a couple of questions, Joe and Craig, so I'll throw those out, and I don't know which one of you wants to answer. The first one, Joe, I think is possibly you, because it was around whether the scheme of work has hyperlinks to be able to then link to the other resources.
That is one I'd have to double check. I know they've been created. I'm not sure. We're just making sure everything's been signed off. So I think
I'll jump in on that one.
Yeah, go on, Craig.
So at this moment in time, we're just going through a contracting phase with STEM Learning in particular for this one. So they will be hyperlinked to the STEM Learning resources page. That should happen imminently. It's just a contracting signature that we're effectively working with STEM. So it will happen, but technically at this moment in time, it isn't there in the public domain.
Okay, that's great though, Craig, that's going to be there as well. I think that'll make it another fantastic resource.
And just to add an extra little bit of layer on that, Joe's worked with STEM Learning to actually, NCFE are endorsing those, qualifications, the resources that support the qualification. So STEM have absolutely created them. We've mapped them against the qualification to make sure they fit that criteria purposeful.
Yeah, that's great, because I mean they have some fantastic stuff at STEM, don't they? So I know they've used some of that stuff, haven't they? So that's great. I don't know which one of you guys this one will be. There's a query about whether you set grade boundaries.
Yeah, so
it might be neither of you. It might be the assessment team.
it is, and that was going to be my textbook answer if I'm being totally honest. That's a very complex question, and there's lots of obviously data that sits behind that. Within the specification, that obviously alludes to what the grade boundaries will sit like. Obviously, with any assessment, it's a sliding scale on every academic year, and they will obviously shift based on obviously the outcomes of the success of the achievement. But it does detailed in with the specification. But if someone's got a more detailed question, please use our email addresses and send us that question through, and we'll absolutely get a full response.
But I think that overview that's in the spec is a pretty good start, isn't it? Yeah, in terms of the grade boundaries. But
it does, and it breaks down the percentages of all of the different components and stuff like that. I appreciate that you'll be looking for exactly what does equate to each grading and stuff like that, and obviously that is a sliding scale year on year depending on the assessment.
And that's just as it is with A level and everything else.
It is exactly that.
And you'll do the same, won't you, in terms of the marking and standardisation and everything? It will run the same, won't it, as an A level?
Definitely, and that standardisation process has already happened at NCFE in preparation for next year's summer series. Yeah,
that's brilliant. And this one's not a question, but if you guys haven't looked at the chat, Alison's put in some fantastic ideas as well in terms of further contextualization and that whole idea, isn't it, that I think you were mentioning, Joe, that one provider was doing of sort of getting that wraparound context, like as working in an analytical lab. I think that whole project-based type approach is a really good way to look at it, isn't it? So that's fantastic. I've got a couple of questions because I always like to throw a couple of questions in, that, Craig. Have you set anything in terms of staffing requirements for who can deliver the occupational specialism? Do you say anything in terms of that when people are saying that they actually want to deliver the T level in science?
Yeah, so it is in black and white on the provider development support pages about the requirements of staffing. So please don't quote me on this for verbatim wording, but basically it's worded around that the delivery staff must have a minimum of the same level of qualification or higher based on the qualification or occupational specialism that they are delivering or working towards that qualification. So effectively, the delivery staff must have a minimum of a level 3 qualification in the subject specific that they are delivering.
Right.
Because there is no occupational specialism assessment in relation to the work placement, you do not need qualified assessors for the T level in health and science. In other ones, you will hear that for like education and childcare, they need assessors because they assess the student in the workplace. That isn't the case for health and science. So it is more based on the competency knowledge of the delivery in the classroom, which must be at level 3 or higher from the staff.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. I am going to let you guys go in a minute, but I have just got 2 other assessment questions. So in the first, if I decide to use the May-June window as my first assessment opportunity, I do need students to do both the core exams and the employer set project at the same time, don't I? I can't have the employer set project being done for the first time in November and exams in June.
That's correct. That's correct, because it's an exam series. So whatever exam series window you decide to use, you must complete all of the assessments associated to either that core or the occupational specialism in that exam window.
Right, but if I do a resit then, so I did my exams and employer set project in the May and June, they didn't do as well in the exams as I wanted them to do. So if I then want to use the November, I can do that for just both the exams. They don't need to do the project again. Is that right, Craig?
That's correct, because it's technically then a different exam series. So obviously it's still an accumulation that we will be able to aggregate the scores against. So they've already successfully completed the employer set project, and then we would use the grades that they achieve on their resit of their core exams to combine that with their previous score of their employer set project. But as Joe alluded to earlier, they must complete both resits of the exams. They can't just do one paper. It's also there, the exam resit window for value added. So actually, it's not just about those students who had failed or who were unsuccessful in achieving a grade. Actually, if you want to put a student back through for a resit for value added, you have that opportunity as well. But the same resit requirements stand that they can't just do one paper, they would need to do both. And the level of protection that you have of that is we will always revert back to their highest grade. So if in the November, December, they actually scored weaker or less in their 2 core exams combined, we would revert back to their summer series exam if obviously that one was higher. Again, we can't take the higher exam score from A and add it to the winter one or B. It has to be that combined overall score.
Yeah, it always has to be in the same series. No, brilliant. That's great. Joe, I thought, you know, some of your slides there where you've summarised some of the assessments, particularly in terms of the number of hours. I think they're really important, and I've been talking to lots of providers just literally about you know, the logistics really in terms of both the employer set project and then particularly the occupational specialism, because you know those have got to be supervised, haven't they? So you've got to make sure that within your whole curriculum planning, you know, if we're talking about, I don't know, 9th of May till the 20th of May for the employer set projects, each of those 3.5, 3 hour, 2 hour tasks, we really needed to make sure we fitted those in. There's quite a lot to do, isn't there, in terms of logistics?
Yeah, there is, and you know, that'll be something to you know, very early on to be going to your exam team to just be asking, you know, about that invigilator, you know, availability and that support that you'll have in running those assessments.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, that's also really important in terms of what I'm going to come on to talk about after the break, is then linking that obviously with your industry placement, because what we need to be careful of as well, isn't it, that students are not out on placement and then we're having to pull them back left, right and centre because they've got to be doing their assessments. So I think that's another complexity in terms of the whole curriculum planning that needs to be factored in.
And on the provided support page on our website, we've already got the key date documents out for the next 2 years, so people can plan ahead for all of those assessments. And also, you know, education and childcare is say a year ahead, so you can almost predict to what it's going to look like in the future as well, because they obviously sit a year ahead in the academic calendar. But that key days document in the public domain, so you don't even need to be a registered provider with us to be able to access that document. Yeah, so you can start to curriculum plan already.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking at it, you know, when working with providers, because I think it is really important, isn't it, to get your head around that, the window for the employer set project, but then obviously the 2 dates in later June for the exams, isn't it, so that you can work around that. And like Sam was saying, you know, then you've done all your learning and development in terms of the core skills, because really you're looking, aren't you, at the end of April, because that window starts quite early in May.
Definitely, it's almost reverse planning. You've got to start with those exam dates in your curriculum planning and then work backwards from there to make sure you've got all of that delivery completed to allow obviously revision and preparation time for those assessment windows to occur.
Yeah, and like Sam said as well, like hopefully students won't need that resit period, but then it's also important just to consider those as well when looking at the industry placement for the second year, just to make sure that there's no clashes there, just in case a student may need that resit window.
Yeah, I mean, I'd certainly want us to really be working towards that students were really prepared for that first opportunity rather than banking on them doing the resit, because we know the figures in terms of resit, and especially like Sam said, you know, then trying to fit in some more learning and some more support whilst they're now on their second year doing their placement, doing their occupational specialism, is going to be so difficult, isn't it? So what we want them to be the best they can possibly be when they go in for that first opportunity.
Absolutely, and now with the caveat of English and maths being removed as well, you may have students who will be in those same exam windows for their GCSE resits. So that additional pressure of any student, you know, doing those resits plus their T-level journey as well. It is a lot of pressure on a young student, so it's being mindful about that delivery and curriculum process to make sure that student's well supported, ready for those exams.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, guys. I'm hoping that you can just stay for the next little bit of the morning as well, just in case we do get some more questions. So what I'm going to suggest now then, everyone, is that we do take a 10-minute break, if that's okay. And then after that, I will go into quite a lot more detail about industry placements, and we'll link the industry placements to hopefully what Sam and Joe and Craig have been talking about. So if we're back for 10 to, that would be brilliant. And then I can walk you through the whole industry placement things. Thanks very much, guys. Try to get your eyes off the screen for 10 minutes and avoid all those emails. And we'll see you at 10 to. Watch and my computer. So I will make a start in the hope that some of you are there. I can see some smiley faces, so that's fantastic. Thank you very much. So welcome back, part 2 of this T-level session, looking really very much at curriculum. And what I want to do in this bit is I really wanted to focus on now that link between the industry placement and the technical qualification content. We've heard a lot this morning, some really fantastic stuff about the content. So now that's where we want to make sure that we've got this link. And Sam made some really good points already in terms of how they've worked with employers, etc., to make sure that the industry placements that their students do go on are going to be the high quality placements. And you will hear DFE talk a lot about high quality industry placements. And what they're really meaning by that is that they are going to be industry placements which are going to support students in terms then of achieving their overall T level. If you haven't looked at this page before, I'm hoping you can all see that website. Yeah, just give me a few nods. Somebody see? Yes, can you see the website, guys? Yes, thank you very much. So if you haven't looked at it before, this is the place for anything to do with industry placements. So I'm sure a lot of you will already be familiar with parts of, if not the whole, of the T-level industry placements delivery guidance. So that extensive document is the answer in terms of what is DFE talking about in terms of industry placements. So that document does contain the policy in terms of the actual requirements, but it is so much more than that and does have some really useful bits and pieces in there in terms of things that you might do working with employers, how you might prepare students, what you might use while students are on placements in terms of progress indicators. So there is loads of stuff in there that is really useful, and it's useful for curriculum staff, not just those staff who may have placement work coordinator in their job title. The thing that I need to stress to you really is that the whole notion around the industry placements is something that needs to be a joint effort between curriculum staff and those who have that job title. Sam mentioned it very early on in her presentation that the first thing they did was the curriculum staff working with employers so that employers understood what students were going to be doing on their T-level in science, the type of knowledge and skills that those students would come to them with, because that then really shows to employers why industry placement is so different to what we might have had as work experience or work shadowing or anything like that. So delivery guidance there. And then if anything changes in terms of industry placement policy, that also will appear on this website. And so the second document down is the one that talks about temporary flexibilities. I'm going to come back and talk about that after I've actually gone through the objective setting and learning goals. The rest of this web page, it's really important to make sure that you do scroll down the whole of the page. And I know that sounds like, you know, really obvious, but there's so much more on this page than just the delivery guidance at the top. all the annexes are further guidance document forms that they refer to in the main document. Some things that are very specific to some T-levels, others that will really help you or those people who have job titles of coordinator, etc. A lot of them are example forms that you can then customize. Some of them are ones that they do definitely want to see you use and will expect to see. The ones that I want to look at particularly are these ones here that are the templates for setting objectives and learning goals for students whilst they're on placement. And so there's a set of these for every single route. So obviously I'm going to look at the health and science one, and this has got the 3 T-levels in it, and I'm clearly going to go to the science one that we're using the most. So just to explain really what this is and where it came from. So those same employers that Craig mentioned that took the apprenticeship standards and developed the outline content were asked to support the production of these templates. And what they were asked was, oh, imagine if you were taking a student on industry placement, yes, how would you actually fill out this form? So what's important to remember with these is it's not so much what's written in the boxes, it's the boxes, because the intention with this template is that it's an agreement. So you've sat with an employer knowing that, you know, they're going to offer a placement, and you know which student is going to be going to that particular placement. And so what you've done is you've sat with the employer to come up with this agreement, contract, whatever we want to call it, so that it's really clear to everybody what it is that students are going to be doing whilst they're on placement, what it is that students are going to get out of that placement in terms of learning goals, and also what you will agree students will come to that placement already knowing, already being able to do. So that's really the intention of this form. And there is a requirement, whilst there is no formal assessment of the industry placement, there is a requirement that you do monitor progress against learning goals. Okay, so you don't have to use this form, you can alter it, you can customize it, and I'll suggest some ways you might want to do that. But when we asked a group of employers, as a, you know, imagine you had a student, this is the thing that they came up with. They did all want to say that they thought it was really important that students were given a role title, that they weren't just, you know, the T-level students. So whatever, you know, your employer agrees that this will be, but our group of employers that we spoke to felt it was really important that students were given a role title. These boxes then set out the expectation in terms of what students would be doing, both in terms of the working pattern and also obviously the duration. In a number of the health ones, I've seen that this has been changed, and this now looks like 45 shifts, because that's the way they work in health. But, you know, this could be, couldn't it, 4 days a week, 7 hours, 45 minutes each day for lunch. So it would be really clear then to you, the employer, the student, what the requirement was going to be. In this instance, in this example, the student is going to do their full hours for their industry placement with this particular employer. One of the flexibilities that you might now be aware of is that it is possible to split the 315 hours between 2, that's the maximum number, between 2 employers. So you can do that, okay? And you can also take some of the hours and do some tasters as well. So up to 35 hours can be taken off the 315, and you could do that as tasters. Perhaps that could be something that you do in year 1 before they go out on actual placement in year 2. So that's the other flexibility that you've got around duration. But have a think about this. If you were sat with an employer, if you know some employers that you're already going to be working and who are going to provide placements, what are you going to say those actual students are going to be called while they're there? And then this one. So what's the overall purpose of the students actually being on that placement? So you could have, used the performance outcomes that are in the occupational specialism. Remember, that the DFE guidance on placements is that providers are expected to make every effort to source placements relevant to the occupational specialism. So if you looked at, the first performance outcome that we have for the occupational specialism, analysing, you could pick that if that's what you wanted as your objective. Perform a range of scientific techniques to collect experimental data in a laboratory complying with regulations. That could be your objective. When we did this one, they slightly worded it differently. They said that they wanted to make it important that students would understand that they would be working as part of a team, they would be doing routine testing, etc. So they just wanted to make that clear, and that the importance of quality in everything that was actually done within that laboratory environment. So you working with your employer, making sure that you're all very clear what the overall objective is for the placement. And then once you've done that, you can also agree with the employer what the typical activities are going to be that student is going to undertake. We're not saying that we should put every single thing on here in terms of what a student would be doing on an industry placement, but let's just go with what are the key activities going to be that are actually then going to support this overall objective. So again, you could start to look at performance outcomes that you've got on your occupational specialisms. You could start to look at some of the skills, etc., that are in your occupational specialisms. So you could look at some of the ones, the core ones as well, and I'll mention how that links in. But what are the typical activities? Now, in this one, and again, remember, we were setting this up very much as an example, I think, to be honest, we'd be hard pushed to find a placement that was going to be able to cover both 1 and 2. So obviously the first activity is all around testing for physical properties. The second activity is around analysis. So I think more than likely I might get a placement where students were doing this one, or this one. I'm not sure I'd get one where they were possibly doing both. I'd take your experience of talking to employers on that. But I think that wherever they're going for their placement, wherever I've been able to secure a placement, I probably am going to be able to get students to do this one. So it's not that this is what they have to be doing. You need to work with your employers and think what would be those typical activities. And then once you've got those, you can then, as this does, link what they're going to get out of doing those activities, what skills and knowledge are they going to develop, are they going to hone, and then how that's really going to support them in terms of completing their occupational specialism. When we did this one, the employers wanted us to split those learning goals into overarching employability skills And you can see then how these start to link perhaps with the employer set project. We did take these employability skills from a document called, how to put together outline content. So that's why these employers chose these ones. There are lots of other employability frameworks that you could use. But what we're saying is that by doing these 3 activities, students will develop their communication skills, their ability to work in a team, to be able to assess risk, and to be able to obviously record, transcribe, etc. So that's what we're going to measure their progress against in terms of them doing that. So as a teacher, if I then phone an employer, I've got something that I can really talk to them about in terms of how my student is getting on that industry placement, rather than just a very general, oh, how are they doing yesterday, whatever. I've got something to really focus on. And that then goes with the technical skills and understanding as well. When we put these together, we were working on the outline content. So as Craig's mentioned, that outline content is what the awarding organisation then takes to turn into their technical qualification specification. So that's what we were using. Because we now have NCFE's technical specification, you could make this even more detailed and make the link even clearer in terms of how this links to the occupational specialism. So, you could have on here, couldn't you, able to follow a multi-step method, because that is skill 1.74 on the occupational specialism. Or, use science to analyse microbiology, S1.75. You really could make this very closely linked to the occupational specialism. So it was really clear then to both you, the employer, and the students, how their industry placement was supporting the occupational specialism. So in this document, because we had 3 activities, this skills list goes on for quite a while, because what we've done is we've put the skills that go with each activity. What's also on this document is then the expectations before the student actually goes onto their placement. And again, this, and I think Sam mentioned this, in terms of making sure that employers are clear what students are going to come in with, but also making sure that students are well prepared for their placement. The worst thing in the world is going to be if students go on their placement, they're not prepared, they don't know what the expectation is, and then there's a problem, because that's not going to help that student, but it's also potentially going to ruin our relationship with that employer. So what we've said is minimum starting requirements. So what must the student have done? So with this particular example, with our imaginary employer here, we've said that students will have had to have done an induction day, which the employer will provide, and they will also have had to have done some health and safety training, which could be some online training that the employer said they've got to do for 2 or 3 hours. Again, we're just saying this is an example. It's not what they must do, but you might want to again talk to your employer about what you want this to be. And then the required prior learning. So what I'm saying is that before this student comes to you, they will have covered all of this. They will have covered this as part of their core. They will have covered this perhaps as some of the practicals we've done. They will have covered this as part of their occupational specialism. So this is a pre-placement, if you like, checklist for everything that I'm saying the students, they will know what risk assessments are. They will have done some work around SI units. So again, this is a really great thing in terms of being able to say to employers, they are coming with all of this, because on industry placements, students are expected to be doing things. It's not a work shadowing. and students are expected to be developing threshold competency. It is quite different to a lot of other technical qualifications that we've been familiar with developing. So that's all that document is. It's an example for you to use, but it is something that you really need to work with your employer. And I think it's something that you can see that a curriculum specialist working with an industry placement coordinator can put together, can really hone and develop, and it'll be something that's so useful then for the student, for the employer, and for you. So you know where it is now, guys, and so it's really up to you to work out how you want to use it. Obviously the health and the healthcare science ones are on there as well, so you might want to have a look at those to give you some more ideas of what you want to have on yours. But you know, you've got 7 students, you've got 7 employers, that could literally be 7 different templates, because the students are going to be doing different things at those different employers, but they will then contribute to those skills and knowledge as part of the occupational specialism. So I've already alluded to a couple of flexibilities, and those are the ones around 2 employers, the taster. There are also some exceptions and caveats in terms of SEND students. There's some very specific things around early years education and childcare industry placements. So those are the fixed flexibilities that have been introduced. But what it doesn't change is demonstrate sufficient progress towards learning goals, work directly with an external employer, and have been on placement for the minimum number of hours. So those 3 things do not change. The temporary flexibilities, and that's this document here. What's important to remember about these is that they have only been introduced, they are only currently relevant to wave 1 and wave 2 industry placements. So what that effectively means for us is that this at the moment is only relevant to students who started their T-level science in September 2021. So some students could make use of these temporary flexibilities. I can't say for definite that that will be true from September 2022 yet. But those flexibilities, and again, I don't know how useful they are or not. One of them is that 25% of placement hours can be undertaken remotely. Now, there's still some requirements for that, in that when DFE talk about that being remote, yeah, what they do not mean is that students can be sitting at home. The requirement is still that although it's remote, they should be in an employer training centre, etc. So it's not, you know, quite as flexible as we might have wanted. I know that for digital, this is a big step forward because they were struggling. The other flexibility that's on this temporary list is this whole notion around whether the placement is occupationally specialism specific. So whilst it does still have that must try to source placements that are occupationally specialism specific, it will be possible for students to do placements at root level. Again, I'm not sure how much that helps us. So yeah, I think, you know, I'll leave that up to you guys to see whether you think that does make any difference in terms of securing placements. I think it's more than that it focuses on the core technical skills rather than some of the very occupationally specialism specific skills. So that's the only other really thing that we've got for this year for us in T-level science. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Is everybody okay about finding all those? I think we've put the link in the chat already. I know a couple of you are asking about is it available as a Word document? You just need to download it straight from there, and then you can save it on your own computers. But it's better really if you can to use the website, because as I say, anything that's new does appear on here. So obviously you can see like these temporary flexibilities, it was only November, yeah, when they were introduced. So you are really better off keep going to the website to make sure that you have got the most up-to-date information on there. So I will stop sharing that. I can't see any other questions that particularly relate to industry placement. What we're going to ask you to do, guys, is we are going to ask you to do a little bit of a poll. Now it says exit poll, but that doesn't mean we want you to exit straight after. We're just going to get you to do a little satisfaction poll, and then if we do have any remaining questions or queries, we can get you to throw those into the chat. So if we can just ask you to do the poll first, guys, that will be brilliant. So literally just 3 pretty easy questions in terms of whether this morning's been useful for you, and also in terms of whether it's fitted in really with your timelines in terms of T-level planning and development. So if we can ask you to fill those in and submit, that would be brilliant.
So if you could upload that for me, Abby, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, polls on there for everybody to tick. So that's brilliant. And if you just click submit, and if you can just let us know how we're getting on with that, Abby.
We've got 3 answers so far. Just want to make sure everybody's able to see the poll. If not, just pop it in the chat for me and I can always try and relaunch it.
So hopefully you can see that, guys. If you can just do the 3 questions, that'd be brilliant. Give you a couple of minutes to do that. And if you've already done that, then
we're at 26 at the moment. So
it's getting better. Just a few more of you, and then we'll have enough to make sure that we can feed that back to DFE.
If you want, I'll leave the poll running, and the last few, just in case we've got any kind of connectivity issues, and I'll leave that running, just close it at the end if that's easier.
Yeah, no problem. That's great. Thank you. So really, guys, it's just whether you do have any final questions that you haven't had time to ask, or if there's anything that you want to comment on, you know, please feel free to do that. Looks like we've stunned them all into silence. I mean, we have given you a lot of information, and hopefully a lot of places now that you can go and look at various bits and pieces. So as I say, if there is anything, do drop us a note, and if not, we will leave you all to the rest of your exciting Thursday. Yeah, we've gained you nearly half an hour as well, so I mean, look at that, fantastic, eh? We will stay just for 5-10 minutes or so, so if there is something that you haven't, I think Lorraine's just put in a question about money. Well, we always like to end with money. At the moment, there is an incentive fund for employers. There is an incentive fund of £1,000 for an employer who actually provides an industry placement. But like the temporary flexibilities, that is only here for those students who will be undertaking their placements within this academic year. So just do be careful that that isn't something that you promise employers who are coming on board for 2 or 3 years down the line, as we don't definitely know that that will be always available. It's some magic system whereby it actually comes through to the college because the students are enrolled on T levels, and then you can donate that to your employers. But there is that £1,000 incentive fund at the moment. Hope that answers that one, Lorraine. Okay, guys, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. I had to think very hard then about what day it was. Lovely to see you all this morning. Thanks very much for your contributions. Hope it's been a useful 2.5 hours. Thanks ever so much, guys. And I say we will be here a little bit longer if there is something that you particularly want to ask us that you didn't want to throw in chat.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks ever so much, Sam.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you
Take
later.
care, Sam.
You can just click the leave button, guys, unless there's something that you particularly want to ask us. Hi, Marina. I didn't realise you were there. So nice to see you.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. I just sent Craig a message while we were doing that saying, my God, those resources, it's such a long time since I was actually working on, it's exciting to see those, Craig, after all that time. Joe, I did do some initial work on all those schemes of work and stuff, so.
Definitely. No, it's been a, it's been a long road, and we're 99% there now, captivated audience here. The last few will be literally, they're getting closed off and signed off this week, so the remaining few will be released by Christmas. That's the plan. But the 99%, the contractual ones, are all done and completed in the public domain now, and we've had huge positive feedback on them. So yeah, we're really happy, and well, it's you guys that developed them, not me, so I definitely won't take any credit.
No, it's good to see you. Helen, Martin,